Hello everyone. Welcome to the audio lecture on Post-Impressionism and the Beginning of Modernism. Now this week, as we look at the changes in art that led us even further away from realism, I'd like to ask you all to remember a question that we discussed way back in Module 1. That question is, what is a painting? Now this portrait of Vincent Van Gogh here on the right is painted by his friend Paul Gauguin, both very famous artists of the time. But really, all that this painting is an arrangement of pigment on canvas that's supposed to represent something about this artist Van Gogh. As the artists of the late 19th century rebelled against the rules of the academic system, they began to question the standards of that system as they explored color, shape, and technique in ways that challenged the ideas of what made a work of art good or bad. Now, I would like to ask you all to return to this definition of a painting as an arrangement of pigment on a surface of a canvas in order to widen your view of some of the art that we'll be looking at. I know many people want art to, quote, look real for it to be good, but I offer to you that that could be a limited perspective. Now, as your instructor, I'm coming from this vantage point of training intensively in an academic system. Yet, unlike the academies of the 18th and 19th century, this training, the academic training of today, incorporates the ideas of the Impressionists and the Modernists that followed them. So there's a saying that once an artist learns a rule, they can know when to consciously break it. And that's something that I tell my students all the time. Who's to say that a painting has to look exactly like the subject? What about if the standard for good and bad art is no longer whether the painting looks, quote, real? What would be another standard? One answer could be that art might have a strong emotional impact. Now that's one way of looking at it. But what about work like the pointillism of Seurat that has more of a scientific feel to it? So once again, this topic of what makes a painting good really raises more questions than it answers. As with Impressionism, there was a style that followed it that we call Postimpressionism, and this was created by relatively few artists over a few years of time. Now the boundaries of this style are a bit fuzzy. Many of the Post-Impressionists were part of the Impressionist movement. This artist, Paul Gauguin, has an interesting story, kind of a sad story really. He was a successful stockbroker who painted on the weekends and collected the work of the Impressionists. So he sort of ran with the Impressionists in Paris. Through his collecting, he became acquainted with many of these painters, Camille Pissarro as well as many of the others. So Pissarro took on Gauguin as a student, and this young stockbroker was allowed to exhibit in 4 of the Impressionist shows. So Gauguin was a person who had a utopian ideal, and this really seemed to obsess and drive him. He had spent his boyhood in Peru and had spent several years as a merchant marine traveling the world. So this left him with a restless dissatisfaction with the businessman's life. He had married a Danish woman when he was in his late 20s, and eventually he fathered 5 children. However, at the age of 35, after he achieved some success in the Impressionist shows, he quit his job as a stockbroker and he left his wife and children with her family in order to pursue his artistic dreams. Part of these dreams included a romanticized notion of whatever a tropical paradise might be. So Gauguin had a strong ego and this very dominant personality. In fact, when he lived with Van Gogh, which they did for quite some time, I think about a year before Van Gogh's death, it didn't work so well. They fought, they drank too much and they fought a lot. But let's talk further about Van Gogh's ideal and his dream. He placed pursuit of his art above all other concerns, and he blamed the difficulties in his life on the fast pace of the modern world. We probably all know somebody like that. Gauguin believed that the roots of art could be found in an uncorrupted tropical island society. So in 1884, soon after he met the young Vincent Van Gogh, he left Paris. Gauguin left Paris for the island of Taboga, near Panama. Upon arriving on the island, his vision of the painter's paradise was shattered. Toboga had become quite civilized as the local people labored under inhumane conditions to build the Panama Canal. Gogan himself ran out of money and worked 12-hour days swinging a pick until he could get enough money to get to Martinique. Now here he faced sickness and poverty. In spite of this, the artist managed to paint several canvases, and he returned to Paris after 7 months. Only 5 years younger, Vincent van Gogh looked up to Gogan as an older role model, and the two artists did live together in southern France. Gogan eventually returned to the islands, where he died disillusioned and alone at the age of 54, leaving behind a body of powerful, symbolic work. Now, Paris in the last decades of the 19th century was a city of lively decadence. It was a prosperous time, and overindulgence really was the status quo of the day. Also, it was a time of a vibrant creative life among the artists of the city. Now, one of the characters of this lively scene was the artist ToulouseLautrec. This eccentric guy had he also had an interesting story from his childhood. He was injured in a riding accident when he was a child, and so what happened was he had stunted legs. He was 4 foot 8 inches tall, and from the waist up, he was a man. I mean, he was a full-size man, but his legs were the size of a child. He documented and celebrated the Paris nightlife through his work. Now, he was an excellent draftsman, but he's best known for his silkscreen and lithographed posters. He also loved to play with photography, as we see in the self-portrait above of ToulouseLautrec painting ToulouseLautrec. Now, this guy, probably more than almost anyone else, was really acquainted and deeply familiar with the nightlife of Paris. And he did overindulge in alcohol and a drink called absinthe, which had a narcotic effect and did affect things like the artist's vision and other capacities of his brain. ToulouseLautrec's pictures capture the nightlife of Paris at this time, and yet it was this partying life, along with his infirmities, that eventually killed him at the young age of 37. And this is the same age that his friend Van Gogh died. The painting above is the famous nightclub, the Moulin Rouge. And what's interesting to note is that ToulouseLautrec added the blue-faced lady on the right after the painting was done. All right, so here's what I invite you to do. Take your thumb and cover up blue-faced lady. Okay, I'm doing it now. Kind of a boring painting. What's going on there? Now, look again at the painting with the addition of that woman, her face lightened by the footlights of a stage that you know is just off to the right. So this is how an artist can really work with composition to great effect. All right, let's talk about one of the most famous post-impressionists and the father of what we call expressionism, and that was Vincent van Gogh. This artist was a troubled, complicated man. He was an epileptic, and he was given to these periods of out-of-control behavior. With modern psychology, there's a lot of theories as to what might have caused this, but back at the time, he was just really not accepted by society. He was born in Holland, the son of a minister, and he was raised in these small villages as his family moved from parish to parish. Even as a boy, Vincent van Gogh displayed a passionate and a brooding nature. He attempted to be a minister, but he was so overzealous in his duties that he was discharged. Poor guy, you know, all he wants to do is be a minister, and they say, oh, you're too enthusiastic, won't work. That's what happened. At the age of 27, he began to pursue his career as an artist. His brother Theo was an art dealer in Paris, and he was Vincent's most loyal supporter throughout his life. Theo sent money, provided counsel, and was just really Vincent's closest companion. Unlike his brother Theo, Vincent didn't do very well in Paris at all. And as a result of his extreme mood swings and his irrational behavior, he caused a stir where he went, and he really became not welcome. After one particularly difficult time in Paris, when he was drinking heavily and heading towards a breakdown, he had himself voluntarily committed to an asylum. The painting to the left above is a portrait of Toulouse-Lautrec. It's a portrait by Toulouse-Lautrec, who we just looked at, of his friend Vincent Van Gogh. And this is painted during one of Van Gogh's trips to Paris. So while Vincent van Gogh was a minister, he worked among these poor peasants, and the struggles that they had in their life really had an impact on him. Once he decided to dedicate himself to being a painter, in his early work he wanted to portray the struggles of these people. So this is The Potato Eaters, and it's his his seminal early work, one of the most important paintings that Vincent van Gogh did. Here they are, all having their repast, eating their dinner in a home that's really little more than a stable. In this detail, we can see the sensitivity and compassion with which he portrayed the faces of his subjects. So maybe they're not perfect in proportion, but there's something about the quality of the feeling that you get when you look at them that gave these paintings quite a lot of power. My theory is that this extreme sensitivity to life is what gave the emotional impact to the work of Van Gogh, but ultimately I think being so sensitive ultimately did destroy him. These are two famous works by Van Gogh. The one to the left was painted when he lived in southern France. How many did he paint? He painted 200 paintings over a period of 4 months. That's 50 paintings a month. And then he died. So part of this frenzied painting was really the creation of many of his greatest masterpieces. So after the constraints of Paris and the gray mists of Holland, Van Gogh just had an awakening when he moved to southern France, in Arles. While in southern France, he pursued his belief that color expresses something in and of itself. These canvases are celebrations of light and color. Now, although Vincent was very productive while in southern France, he was also very lonely. Now, Gogan, the painter, came to visit, and the two artists had dreams of developing a utopian community in southern France. But instead of achieving their ideal, their strong personalities clashed, and probably their excess love of alcohol. And it was Gogan's razor that Van Gogh used to slice off the bottom half of his ear. After this dramatic act, Van Gogh was hospitalized in an asylum. It's actually a rather nice asylum with a lot of open-air courtyards and a nice view of the valley below. In fact, the painting Starry Night, that was painted from Van Gogh's hospital window after he cut off his ear. In looking at Starry Night, we can really get a glimpse into this artist's perceptions. Here we have a really pretty ordinary view down into a valley, but yet he's transformed it into swirling lights and colors. So let's look at the progression of his self-portraits. I find this really interesting. Eventually, he was released from the asylum, and he took a room in a small village in southern France. Now, he was apparently improving, but still, in late July, he shot himself in the abdomen, and he died a day later. His last words were, "I wish I could go home now." And perhaps at that point he found peace. In the self-portraits above, we can see the progression of the life of this artist, of the times when he was perhaps less balanced and times when he was more stable. Now, one more note on his, quote, suicide. Recent evidence has suggested that perhaps it could have been an accidental shooting by neighborhood kids that used to taunt Van Gogh, and maybe part of his gentle nature was that he never ratted them out, that he died letting people think that he killed himself in order to save these children's lives. I like that story. Oh, let's look at Paul Cézanne. He's credited with creating art that would have a profound effect on the world for generations to come. In fact, he's really the father of modern art. Cézanne showed the world a new way to see. Really, he's building upon what Van Gogh has started. The power of this artist's work is that he could convey the essence of nature without rendering the details of a scene. He believed that all of nature could be broken down into the cylinder, the sphere, the cone, and I'll add the cube, and that there was enduring shapes and colors in nature that could be reproduced by the artist in endless variations. We're going to end this first half of the lecture on Postimpressionism into Modernism, And we'll pick up with Cezanne in part 2. Thanks for listening.